What's going on, people? Welcome to another episode of the Athletes to Athletes podcast. Today, I talk with former Penn State national champion volleyball player Katie Kabbes. She gives me an inside look at her journey to joining one of the best volleyball teams in the country and what it was like being a part of a championship culture on the Nittany Lion campus. So as always, welcome to the A2A podcast. I hope you enjoyed today's conversation. So we're back with another A2A podcast, and today I'm sitting down with a friend of mine who I used to work with, Miss Katie Kabbes. Katie, it's great to see you. We got to catch up a little bit before we start recording, but I'm going to kind of allow you to introduce yourself to our audience. So Katie, without further ado, go ahead.
Okay, thanks for having me. It's awesome to see you again. Yes, my name's Katie. I am now 32 years old, so a little bit removed from my playing days, but living in Raleigh, North Carolina, where I'm from, and worked with you, in Austin, Texas. Lived there for about 9 years, and I grew up playing all different kinds of sports, and then finally made my decision to focus in on volleyball, and that's kind of, where my story or journey really kind of evolved into a much bigger thing than I ever planned. But youngest of 4 siblings, which definitely showed me the ropes of all the different sports, and definitely where I got my competitive edge, specifically my older brother, beating the crap out of me growing up. So that's kind of my background. I had 2 parents also who were college athletes as well. So that was probably instilled in all of us from a young age of get in activities and fill your days with productive things to do. Don't sit in the house and play video games. Kind of how we were all raised. So, yeah.
Yeah, I can relate. I'm the youngest of 4 as well. And, I got the crap beat out of me by my older siblings as well. So luckily now I'm bigger than most of them and we all get along anyway. So, I don't really get that same type of treatment, but
it's funny. Like I noticed that in a lot of families that the youngest ends up being like the biggest. And growing up, the youngest, I absolutely hated it. Like they treated me terribly, made me tough. But now I absolutely love it and would never change a thing.
Yeah. You definitely get a little bit of harsher treatment because you're the last one to come along, so they can all gang up on you when you're the younger sibling. So lucky for us, we've kind of grown up and grown out of that.
Exactly.
So like, as you said, you played a lot of sports growing up. What types of sports did you get into and when did that kind of competitive fire start for you?
Yeah. Well, like I said, I think the competitive spirit started way before sports, because of my brother specifically. It's 2 sisters, a brother, and then me. And I think my brother viewed me as like the brother he didn't have. So, it was always us running around outside playing like street hockey, like jailbreak, like whatever, neighborhood games with all the kids. But my first thing my parents put me into was gymnastics. And I was like 2.5, I think, just as like a little kid activity to get Katie out of the house. And quickly, my mom always says, like, quickly, the instructors were like, she's going to be really tall. Like, there's no way this is going to be her sport. And then my parents around 3.5 put me in dance. And I loved dance. That was my first love. So I started doing that from 3, and I did that all the way till I was 14. And I did it for a company that's where you do competitions. So like, Dance Moms, like that show, that is, well, my mother is not that way, but it was like full on costumes and travel around and very serious like competitions. And I'm really glad that they did that because I'm 6'3". So I think that taught me a lot about coordination and set me up pretty well for all the other sports I joined. But when I say my parents literally put us in everything, like swim class or swim team, tennis, soccer, softball, t-ball, basketball. I'm like, I didn't do karate. I'm trying to think what I didn't do, but and my siblings all did the same. So if I wasn't playing it yet, I was at the gym or watching them do it. So I was always, observing sports. But I'd say I focused in on dance. And then around 9 or 10, I started playing AAU basketball, which, was pretty competitive, where you're traveling all around the state and the country doing AAU tournaments. And then I tried out for volleyball in middle school for the school team. And that's when, and then 8th grade, I tried out for club, which is like the year-round volleyball. And once I made club, I made a national team with older girls, I really had to make a decision. Like, I just didn't have enough time to do all of them anymore. That was when my mom, 8th grade, 14, I think, was like, we have to drop something. Like, you just don't, there's not enough time in the day to do what you're doing. And I definitely felt I was the best at volleyball compared to all three. So I dropped basketball and volleyball and really focused in on, or basketball and dance, and focused in on volleyball.
Yeah. Yeah. I was, that's something that, with us working together and talking as much as we did.
Yeah.
I always wondered why volleyball, right? Why was it volleyball and not basketball or, something else? Because like you said, you're 6'3". So, I can remember the day you walked into the office and I'm like, okay, she's either going to be on Flow Hoops or she's on Flow Volleyball. One of those two websites is where Katie is going to end up, and it ended up being volleyball. So, how did you figure out that it was going to be volleyball and not basketball for you?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And honestly, it's the number one thing I get asked when I go out in public is, do you play basketball? And I really loved basketball, and not to like toot my own horn, but I was like naturally pretty good at it. And all my siblings played it. All three siblings. And I don't know, I just like, my older sister, Kelly, was probably one of the top players out of North Carolina before some other players came along. And so once I started really playing volleyball, I think naturally I was just more gifted in that sport. Also, I had some really tough AAU basketball coaches that just were like obsessed with on the line, like suicide sprints. That when it came down to 13, 14 years old, I'm like, oh, I hate running. And volleyball was just like, I don't know. I kind of joke too that I had this like little identity crisis at like 10 years old where, dance was super feminine and like super girly girl. And then basketball was like just a little more like masculine energy. And I just like, I'd go to dance class. I loved both, but I just felt like there were two very conflicting sides to me. And when I found volleyball, like it just felt like me, where it's just felt like you can be, it's still a feminine sport, but it's super powerful and athletic. And I felt like the two skill sets from both of those sports, volleyball was just kind of like spoke to me like, this is your sport. And my dad was super bummed because my dad actually, he played basketball at Rice University and like was really hoping for one kid to commit to basketball, and he thought it was going to be me. And so when I finally went volleyball, he was just like, damn it, there she goes.
What sports did your siblings end up getting into as they got older?
Yeah, so my dad played basketball, and then my mom, fun little fact, she was the first baton twirler, like featured majorette at Georgia Tech, and was a cheerleader because back then you could do both. Then my oldest sister, Lindsay, went to Loyola of New Orleans and played volleyball. And then she ended up transferring to a D3 school here in North Carolina and played volleyball and basketball in college. And then my sister Kelly played volleyball at George Washington University. And then my brother in high school did like basketball, golf, and track. And he didn't play a sport in college, just club sports, and play basketball club. But yeah, so like I said, very athletic family to pave the way for me.
Yeah. So your siblings, it sounds like the three girls all went onto the volleyball court at some point in time. Did you guys, and are you guys all 6 foot plus and playing these same sports, or were you different positions?
Yeah. So we get our height from my dad. He's 6'8", or was 6'8". He's shrinking in his older age, but we don't have to talk about that. Lindsay, we were all different positions in volleyball. Lindsay was in middle, I believe so. I think she might have alternated a couple. And Kelly was a middle exclusively. And then I was an outside hitter in high school, and then I ended up playing a little bit of middle and right side in college. So yeah, kind of all took a little bit of different paths within the sport.
Yeah. Did you guys practice together? Was it a little sibling rivalry type of thing where you were preparing each other?
I definitely remember like some vacations where we'd play like beach volleyball together, or like a lot of just like peppering on the driveway, which is just like a warm-up drill, like whenever we were bored. But I feel like my sister, once I really started going, my sisters always like made jokes about that if we were to really play, that I would kill them, but I wouldn't try to. But yeah, my sister Lindsay is 5'10". Kelly's like right at 6 feet, and then my brother's about an inch taller than me at 6'4", and then me.
Yeah. So a lot of height in the family. Yeah. So a lot of height and athleticism from the parents who were very tall and athletic as it is.
Yeah.
What was that? And then, you just said you guys kind of would be out on the driveway, kind of peppering things around. But what was that like when all of you have some sort of sport going on, you are supporting each other, but there's still that kind of that grit? Is that where you kind of saw where each one of you started to kind of get a lot better at sports and these things, and that's where that mindset change kind of came from?
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like it was interesting. I think my siblings and I, like my oldest sister's 6 years older, the next one's 4, my brother's 2. I feel like my sisters were well like moved on by the time I started to like peak, that there wasn't really much competitive nature between my sisters. And then my brother, I would say it was more just at the house, not within our own sports, of just competitive nature of like, if we're playing pool or like pop a shot, like it was just like game on. But I feel like I really got my own competitive, like I don't think naturally I was a super, super competitive player until I started getting into like the latter years of high school, when I knew like what my path was going to be in college. And it was like, I'm going to go play with some of the best players in the country, and I got to like get my butt into that mindset. And I had some really awesome, I was very, very blessed to have some incredible high school coaches that kind of knew what I didn't know and knew what was ahead of me, and had to try to probably really work to put that competitive nature in me. I think naturally I'm more of like a happy-go-lucky. I'm competitive with myself, but I wouldn't say I'm like an in-your-face competitor with, opponents, except probably my brother. But I think I just had some coaches who knew where I was going, and at Penn State, and with one of the toughest coaches, and were, really instilling that competitive nature in me, and that helped significantly.
So yeah, you end up at Penn State, but before then, when do you start to get attention from these coaches when they're calling you? How old are you when recruiting starts?
Yeah, I mean, when I talk about this, it's crazy to me to think about now being, 32 years old, but I was really, really lucky. My journey is kind of unique. So my best friend is also my height, and she ended up playing at UCLA, and she was a naturally really great player. And when we first tried out for club volleyball, we made a 16-year-old team as 8th graders. So we're 13 turning 14. And also keep in mind, like at the time, North Carolina volleyball was not on the national scene. It was pretty, it was the hotbeds like Texas and California and Chicago were like the hotbeds of volleyball. And just in the last 20, 30 years, volleyball's just grown exponentially. I think it's now like the top youth sport for female girls or female athletes in youth level. So it's grown significantly, and back then North Carolina was far behind. So us making the 16-year-old team probably doesn't speak as highly as it would nowadays. Or you know what I'm trying to say? Like probably back then there was just not a lot of athletes in North Carolina to put this team together. But so we make this team, and we were really blessed because at the time there was one player, Megan Hodge was her name, and she was ended up being the National Gatorade Player of the Year. And she was 2 years older than us, so she was 16, which was like her prime recruiting time. And she waited until her senior year to commit, which is pretty unheard of now in the sport. So every college coach in the country was coming to watch Megan Hodge. And then they'd see these 2 other 6'3" girls and ask about us, and then find out we were 13. And that got Katie and I a ton of attention that we probably would not have had we not had Megan Hodge on our team. So I'm still, really close with Megan Hodge, and credit a lot of my success to her for exposing us on the national level. So, it's crazy to me to think, but 8th grade was when Katie and I we got offered a scholarship, and, we had no idea what we were even thinking about or where we wanted, if we wanted to play this sport seriously or go, but, volleyball is pretty insane in that they start recruiting pretty young. I wish that they waited a lot later, but that's just kind of the nature of the game. I think it's changed a little now, but.
Yeah, I think recruiting in general has changed a little bit outside of probably sports like gymnastics or anything, where they're really trying to get the younger athletes. Do you remember who that first offer came from?
Yeah, it was Carolina, UNC. And all my siblings, my parents went away for college. My siblings went away. So I knew immediately I did not want to stay in North Carolina. And I didn't even entertain it. It was like, nope, I'm getting out of here.
So once, that's kind of the first domino, but obviously as that exposure is happening for your teammates, you're getting the same type of attention.
Yeah.
Is it, and you mentioned, you had older siblings that had gone off to college and as well as your parents. Did that make things easier for you to kind of figure out the recruiting process and what these coaches were essentially trying to sell you on? Was because you had, your dad that played at Rice and your mom was at Georgia Tech, and then your older siblings, you literally got to watch them go through that recruiting process. Was that something that made it easier for you?
Maybe in some ways, because I think my parents were really great about, what you need to look for and what's important in a program and just college in general. But I think my sisters had very different experiences. Like my sister Kelly did not think she wanted to play in college until very last minute. So she turned a lot of people away, and then last minute decided she wanted to and was a little late to that game. So she had to market herself a little more. But I definitely think just in general, like watching my sisters and brother, like decide where to go, college in general is just a big decision. And given like everybody went to a big city, like my sister went to New Orleans, one went to DC, one went to Atlanta. It just, my dad went to Houston, mom Atlanta, that I had in my head, like I want a big city. That's like all their influence really had on me. But yeah, it was very overwhelming at the time, I remember, because it's just, we had to think about it so early, and, you're still a kid and you have friends that are non-athletes and they're not even thinking about college, that it's hard to have anybody to relate to. But obviously in the end of the day, it was a huge blessing to have these options. And, but you just have so much to think about at such a young age. It can be a little overwhelming.
Yeah, that's definitely tough. I think the amount of people that I've talked to, that have gone through recruiting processes as an 8th grader or even younger, some of them, the gymnast that I spoke to, I think she said she was in 6th or 7th grade when you're like right between like 7th and 8th grade when she started getting recruited. That's a lot to take on.
It's wild.
Yeah. Like, do you remember that?
Through high school. Yeah.
Yeah. What do you remember from that time?
It was wild. Mail just coming to the house like crazy. My mom started like a filing cabinet to try to keep it all in order. What the stuff people were sending was kind of crazy, like fake magazine covers. And a lot of schools tried to recruit my best friend and I together. So, and then just going to tournaments, I liked the recruiting process. Like when coaches would come see me, I liked kind of showcasing my talents and all that. I actually felt like it was harder to play once I committed, to have that one coach like, oh my God, you're stuck with me now. Now I have to really impress you, and I don't want you to regret recruiting me. I liked when I was non-committed and playing. I liked that pressure. But it just is definitely, you're still a kid. You're trying to just, go to Friday night football games and socialize, but you have tournaments on the weekend. You have, my mom was very involved. She really spearheaded my recruiting of, when I'd have national tournaments all over the country. Like if we're in, California, okay, we're going to schedule X visits around that tournament and that knock out like West Coast schools. And my mom was great about, if you have as many options as you do, or you're lucky enough to have that, let's really take a look at the full spectrum of schools. Like, let's look at small private schools. I looked at St. Mary's up in Northern California. Let's look at the big traditional ones, like ones not in big cities. And I did a good job, I think, with her leading me of really taking in all my options and looking at a wide variety all over the country. And I was very lucky to have that option.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, it definitely takes somebody who is organized and who's been through it and knows what to look for to kind of help out in that capacity.
Yeah.
So as you're going throughout this recruiting process, and you said a lot of these teams are trying to recruit you along with your best friend. Did that backfire on them because you guys are individuals, right? Or did you want to go to school together?
Yeah, it was a very, we were very thoughtful about that process. I always joke kind of, but I know we're serious. Like, I feel like I grew up as close to having a twin as possible without having a twin, because we did everything together, volleyball, school, club volleyball, and then this recruiting process. And we did some visits together, but I thought we both made the decision, we thought it was very important that we take our own journeys for college. Like, we had really been so tied at the hip for those since fifth grade, honestly. And she's like a sister to this day, and sometimes we joke, we're like, did we make it now? We're like, it would have been so fun if we went to college together. Like, did we make the right choice? But I think it was pretty critical in our development to go off and have our own journeys. And we kind of made that decision pretty early. And while schools did try to recruit us, we entertained it a little, but she was always called to West Coast, California, and I felt indifferent. And when it came down to what schools really were down to the final few, it just ended up for me not out there. And I think it was for the better that we just kind of went a little. It didn't change our relationship at all, so we're blessed in that sense. But I think we needed to kind of find our own identity in some ways.
Mm-hmm. What were your final schools that you narrowed it down to?
Yeah, I'd say my top three came down to Northwestern in Chicago, Tennessee, and Penn State. And all very different kind of scenarios. So it was like not just comparing, obviously the schools are very different, but, the volleyball program itself and the role I would play at those programs presented very different scenarios. So it was kind of a lot of comparing apples and oranges in a sense.
Yeah. So what was it about Penn State that kind of lured you to Pennsylvania?
Yeah. So that player I mentioned, Megan Hodge, who was on my club team, and that really phenomenal player, she was at Penn State. So she was my host when I went on my first visit there. And, I think when you go, and this is for anybody, when you go on these trips, you have to really have the mindset that they're going to put their best foot forward. They're going to give you all the glitz and glam. You're going to hear the best stories. You're not going to hear the bad things. And every school has bad and good. And you really need to try to find the truth. And for me, not only was Megan a great resource for me to give me the real raw truth, I felt like the coach, who was this legendary coach who just retired last season, he was there for 42 years, just an old school guy who started this program from nothing and built it from the ground up. I felt a real connection to him that I didn't feel at anybody with any other coach, that he was a no BS, listen, I want you here if you want to be here. If you want to get better, this is the place to be. If you want to contend for a national championship, I'm not making any promises except you will get better if you come here. And I liked his approach to recruiting. He's like, I only want kids that want to be here and are going to work hard every day. And no sales pitch whatsoever. He let the program, and the university is obviously beautiful. He let it all speak for itself, and just that kind of confidence, I think, and no selling me, I really loved. And also, the team at the time was on its way to being a top national contender for the championship every year. And so, I was lucky in my high school years to kind of be the go-to player. And I felt like it had always been pretty easy for me in my volleyball journey, that I could go to a school like Tennessee that was really trying to build the program, and I would step in and start right away. And I was in my head, that just fit what I had already done. I just felt like volleyball had come pretty easy to me, and I really wanted to go somewhere and play with the best players in the country and see what I was made of. And I don't feel like I was going to be tested at the other two schools the way I would be tested at Penn State. And I definitely was right on that.
Yeah.
And just
when did you make that decision?
Yeah, I committed when I was a sophomore. So I think 15 years old. Yeah. And I was going to say, I think also with Penn State that stood out. I mean, I had in my head I wanted this big city, which is probably why I was looking at Northwestern, because I absolutely love Chicago. But Penn State had that huge, I really knew I wanted a big athletic tradition, like a program that just had a ton of tradition and following and like in the athletic community. And when I went up to Penn State, like those people are diehard Penn Staters, more than I realize now with time. Like Penn Staters are insane fans. And so it just kind of fit what I was looking for in that sense.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you're right about that. I'm from Pennsylvania. I'm here. I see the Penn State stuff right next to the Philadelphia Eagles stuff. You know, when you're a fan of when you live in Pennsylvania, you kind of have to be a fan of all the teams here, which I am not. So I'm kind of the sore thumb that sticks out. But you know, when you're committing as a sophomore, you said this before, it made it harder for you to kind of perform after that. Did you feel pressure from the outside? Because now when you have a game, you know, you're not just one of the top recruits in the country, you're a Penn State commit, you know, and I mean, you know, we work together in the media capacity. So we've written about other athletes in that same kind of realm. We've been on both sides of it. Do you remember that first article of, you know, she is a Penn State commit. She's going to be headed off to be a Nittany Lion. These were her stats, everything else. You kind of become the focal point of the team when you commit to such a huge, you know, program.
Yeah.
How much did that kind of get to you mentally once, you know, as a sophomore, as you said, you want to go to Friday night games and you just want to be a kid, but now you have this spotlight of she's going to Penn State. She's a top level recruit. How did you handle that mentally, and how much did it affect you?
Yeah, no, I definitely think it affected me. Because not only like there's the pressure of just, you know, you decide, you make your commitment, and then that coach comes to watch you and you want to make him proud that I'm coming to you, like you should be proud. And so just that pressure alone, like I would have had that at any school, I think. But then you combo it with the fact that Penn State started to get better every single year while I'm in high school. This program is they won the national championship my senior year. So all of a sudden now I'm an 18-year-old being like, oh my God, I'm going to the defending national championship school. Like that's a whole nother ball game of pressure that I had on myself. And yeah, people talk at the tournaments and say like, oh man, that girl's going there, that girl's going there. And you do start to really feel that pressure, and you want to just be sure you're ready to go when you step foot on campus. And that's where I had my coaches being like, you know, and also the Penn State coach was known to be probably one of the hardest coaches in NCAA volleyball. He was just old school and physically demanding. And so, you know, there's the pressure of getting stronger and getting in shape and ready to compete with the best players, you know, 21-year-olds who are dominating the college scene. So you definitely freak out a little bit, but you have to kind of not only train your body, but your mind to be ready to go when you get there.
And this is something that kind of just popped into my head. Did recruiting stop after you committed as a sophomore? Because I've talked to a lot of athletes that are like, yeah, I mean, you can't sign into a certain time anyway. So you are still getting, I mean, and you see it now, kids flipping from one school to the other, and, you know, coaches continuing to call, and, you know, and then I'm sure NIL deals make things a lot worse these days, but back then they're throwing every sales pitch at you. Did recruiting continue after you commit to Penn State as a sophomore?
Yeah, I mean, I think the landscape has changed so much. I was just at a football tailgate like last weekend talking with some Notre Dame, a family whose son plays at Notre Dame, and talking about how NIL has changed the whole dynamic. And I feel pretty strongly like I'm glad that was not a component when I played. But to answer your question on that, like I felt like it stopped when I committed in high school. For sure. I think that maybe it's just the volleyball community. I don't know. The coaches really respect that decision and kind of lay it to rest. But interestingly enough, now you got the portal, right? Where that's a whole other ball game that athletes are just joining the portal and leaving when they want to, which I have a lot of strong opinions on that too. It's just kind of wild to me. But it stopped in high school. But then when I got to college, they're not allowed to do this and recruit while you're at another school. But I wasn't playing to the extent that I think some other schools thought I could have or should have. And, transfers happened. And I did have a school reach out to my club coach asking, like, would she consider it? And that's kind of, they try to like circumnavigate the rules and find an in to see, is she happy? Would she consider transferring? And I didn't, but that's the only time it kind of popped up again about anybody really trying to recruit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, like I said, I've heard of so many kids that commit and, they continue to go on recruiting trips before they sign and things like that. So, I was wondering, did that ever happen? And
yeah,
how does it feel when that happens?
Yeah, it didn't really happen with me, but I did hear about stories. I mean, I think my parents raised me, you make a commitment, you are staying to it and you're loyal.
Mm-hmm.
But you do hear stories about people decommitting. So to your point, like, I think it went on for sure, because how else would these girls decommit and go to another school without having someone entertain or try to sway them? So it does happen, but I think in my family, that was just not an option.
Yeah. So now you get to Penn State, and you're on campus, and obviously, you said you had a coach that was a straight shooter. He wasn't really giving any type of sales pitch, but you're the girls that you stay with and the people that you meet are giving you that sales pitch of why Penn State's the best. But then once you get there, all that stuff goes out the window. It's not the same whatsoever. You're now a freshman, you're lowest on the totem pole. You're there to take somebody else's spot. So it's very different. What's your experience like once you get to Penn State?
Yeah. I'm trying to think back. I mean, it was such a whirlwind, just so, and for anybody, any non-athlete, going to college is such a big life shock and taking on so much change in your independence. And, but with the team, like, I don't remember like the biggest changes. I really was very happy with my decision at Penn State. Like, I look back at my 4 years and loved it. But like, there was a lot of, I don't know how to explain, like, things my journey there over the 4 years and what I learned, but I do feel like they were I knew it was going to be very hard. Like, preseason, and everyone says Penn State's preseason was the hardest, that I had to go a semester early, like summer, to train and take summer classes. That's just common what people do. I didn't know that was a thing. So, I guess just like, you don't know till you go through it and have that firsthand experience and then survive one preseason and be like, okay, you will survive. You did it. And you just like kind of surprise yourself of how strong you are mentally and all that. But I joined the team. They were the defending national champions with 5 All-Americans out of the 6 players. 5 were All-Americans returning. So this girl saw zero to like little to no playing time. So that definitely is an adjustment. You go from being hot shot all 4 years in high school to everybody's a hot shot and you better step up every single day. An example being like in practice, our coach, if you didn't go for a ball, you got kicked out of the drill. Like, it was just, we don't accept no effort. And, in high school, you get away, when you're kind of the best player, you can get away with murder. And, you quickly learn there's a zero tolerance policy of laziness and just the overall work ethic of a program like that. It's like you ship up or ship out. And he would not hesitate to boot you if you did not add value to the team. And you just had to learn, like, every day you had to bring your best. And that's something that as a high schooler moving into that mindset, you have to quickly shift and realize, oh my gosh, this is how, like, great doesn't just happen. Like, great is a choice every single day even if you don't feel like it, to show up and give your best effort.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So when as a freshman, it's tough to get on the court. You're seeing very little time. When is that first time that you get some sort of playing time and actually get to play?
Yeah. I mean, I had definitely moments in my freshman year where I'd go in, but no consecutive playing time. So in that year, a couple girls in my position would be graduating. So I used that year to just soak in as much knowledge as possible and to get physically stronger, to put myself in a position to contend. And, at a school like that, like there are freshmen coming in the next year who could easily take that spot from you, like no one was guaranteed a starting spot the next year. And, that's where my journey at Penn State was definitely a challenging one. And a lot of people would be like, why did you go there? If, I was not a 4-year starter, and my next 3 years there, I was probably, I'd say 30 to 50% a starter of the year. And then really, I think I found my niche as kind of like the sixth man, like the first sub off the bench. Each season was very different in kind of the challenges that were presented. We had like an ACL go out one year, and then I could play multiple positions. So I became like a utility player, which kind of worked to my disadvantage because all these other players that were very specialized in their position and no one else. One girl played bad, who could go in for her? We didn't have a backup. So that's where I found my niche. And that presented a lot of like mental challenges for me because I was used to being, from high school where I was top dog. And I definitely had some hard conversations of this with my family of this, are you sure you're happy? Is this what you want to be doing? And I loved Penn State as a whole. And that was a big piece of advice my parents gave me was if you go down in an injury and volleyball is taken away from you, do you want to be at this school? And I was sure to make a decision. Like I loved Penn State and I loved the coach and everything. So as I wasn't getting maybe the playing time I thought I deserved or whatever, I made a commitment to Penn State and I was going to see it through and not even consider transferring. And I'm really proud of myself for that because I think I learned so much more about myself and being a team player and like life skills that I don't think I would have learned if I went to somewhere like Tennessee and just, a school like that and just played all 4 years. And I don't know, I think it taught me a lot going to a school like that and having those personal challenges. And I'm really proud for sticking it out.
Mm-hmm. So you were on a national championship team, and you came into a national championship team as a freshman.
Yeah.
How did the rest of those years, once you got there, how did that go?
Yeah, very well. I was very, very lucky to be, we ended up winning my freshman, sophomore, and junior year. And then we lost my senior year to my best friend at UCLA in the Sweet 16. So I always joke, like if I was going to lose to anybody, it'd be her. She went on and got her ring. So in that year was just, we lost, so many players. It was a rebuilding year. It was very tough. But I mean, the thing is you go to a school like that and like the Sweet 16 is considered a failure of a year but that's by no means a failure. Now that we're all older, we're like, should still be very proud of what we accomplished. But yeah, I mean, I was there at a time that it made history and I feel so lucky to be a part of that program and look back at those years very fondly. I mean, some of the best years of my life that with those teams, those girls that just really laid a big history there at Penn State.
Yeah. I was going to ask, did you ever end up playing against your best friend? But it looks like she got the better of you in one of the bigger moments.
Yeah, it's kind of wild. So we played each other twice, and it's like a crazy story because she was my first volleyball match. We went to a tournament in Hawaii, and it was like us, Hawaii, I forget who else, and UCLA. And so she was my first career match, and we both actually played that match. We beat them then. And then 4 years later, she ended my career. So she kind of bookended my career. And like, of course that would happen.
Yeah. So as your career is kind of coming to a close, and this is something that every single athlete has to think about, did you think, what's the next step? Do I go, Team USA? Do I go beach volleyball? Do I have some sort of Olympic dream? Like, what were your thoughts as your career is kind of coming to a close at Penn State?
Yeah. I had done a few of the USA, in high school, youth and junior national teams. I was lucky enough to make those. So I had done the USA pipeline. To be honest, like once it got around college time, I was not at the level to think Olympics. I had some teammates who went on and played, and I'm self-awareness. I knew that was not going to be my journey. But for those kind of next tier players, like a lot of NCAA or Division I players have the option to go play overseas. And volleyball is honestly much bigger everywhere else in the world than America. So, and that was something when I was recruited to, I always had a dream to play overseas and professionally. And so when I was looking at schools, I wanted to be sure that coach or that program had a good history and relationship with agents to be able to get me a contract to go overseas. So that was kind of my next thought. And I was lucky enough to go play in Cyprus, which is a small country in Europe. And glad I did it, tried it, but it was not what I expected. So that was very short-lived, and then quickly retired after that. But that was all I really thought was I'll play professionally and give me a chance. They pay for your living expenses. I'll get to travel and see the world. And glad I did it, but I quickly learned like my love for volleyball was very much centered around my teammates. And, now that was all taken away, just NCAA volleyball that's, funded by college football. And then you go to Europe and there's not that kind of money. It just was a big life lesson of, okay, I'm like, do I love volleyball as much as I thought I did? Or did I just love Penn State and my teammates? And that's when I officially decided like, it's time to hang up the sneakers.
Yeah. And, speaking of like other sports and kind of being in such a elevated kind of ecosystem with sports, do you feel like Penn State, who had, top teams in wrestling and there's guys going to the NFL and, do you feel like being Boston and as well as you guys being national champions in your own right, you're one of those top tier teams on campus that are bringing national titles home, right? Do you feel like being in that sort of ecosystem in that community kind of fostered those dreams of, okay, well, my friend who's a wrestler is going to be going off and trying to wrestle in the Olympics. My friend who's playing football on Saturday nights is going to be drafted, in the first round this year. Do you feel like that sort of mindset was kind of honed in with you guys that we're top tier athletes? We go to the next level. That's what we do. Yeah.
I mean, I'm a big believer in like quotes, and I had a high school coach who, before I went off, like wrote me a book of just quotes, he's like, you're going to go through these challenging times. And I always use that kind of quote book to really focus in. And I'm a big believer of like, you are who you surround yourself with. And that's a big reason I wanted a big athletic traditional program. And yeah, I mean, when we're just doing weights and the wrestling team is right there, who's also won 3 in a row national championships. And these are the people we're friends with. When you surround yourself with greatness, it definitely holds you more accountable and pushes you to succeed more. So it just was like this environment inside of Rec Hall of this is what we do. And anything short of it is a failure. And which, that just definitely sets your mindset up beyond college of holding yourself to a higher standard and accountability and having goals.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So once all of the volleyball comes to a close, did you ever think maybe instead of playing, I should be a coach or I should do this or, something to stay part of the sport outside of the capacity of when, we were working together and covering it?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, volleyball was like a true love of mine. And I had some friends who just didn't feel that way. It was just like, they did it because they were good at it. It got them to college. And, but I really felt like it was like a huge love of my life and passion. So I stayed in it for sure. I mean, I coached a club team in Austin, Texas for 5 years and wanted to give back. I loved working with those girls, 14 to 17-year-olds who were going on to play at top schools. And I found a lot of joy in that. And then I worked for a company where I was in volleyball, working for like big national tournaments all over the country and working with USA Volleyball. So I definitely loved it, but then it just came to a point where I really wanted to evolve beyond volleyball and move past it and kind of expand myself and really did step away totally from it after working at Flow Sports. So, I'll dabble occasionally when playing, but played in a tournament not too long ago. That was like an all-day event, and I was definitely like, my body is killing me. I cannot do this anymore. So I feel like I'm fully done now. And that's okay. I'm happy about that.
Yeah. Yeah. You get to that point where you're just like, this is the realm I want to stay in. Like, I've got my working out and that's about it. I don't think I can really compete anymore. But then, you'll have those days where you're just like, you know what, I can still do it. And you're like,
yeah, I don't know why I thought I could play like all day tournament, like 8 matches, lesson learned. Maybe I'll go sub for a couple leagues here and there, but not a tournament. But yeah, I mean, it's interesting too. Like your question made me think, I definitely remember a period right after college of like, and maybe even beyond. And I always wish people talked about this more. And I feel like a lot of people now I've seen like programs start to help. I always thought like, it'd be great to help people. Because so long your life is sport. And it's just like you have somebody laying out your full day. You're going to lift, you're going to class, you're going to practice, then you have rehab and train, like, all the stuff you have to do to be top of your game, that it just stops. And then it's like an identity crisis of who am I? And when your life is so focused on one thing, I vividly remember sitting with she was my freshman roommate. And then we stayed best friends through college, like senior year, sitting there like, what now? And it's just this silence, and you really are forced to sit with yourself and kind of redefine yourself. That I know I've talked to so many friends who were college athletes that was the hardest period, I think, you don't have that constant drive anymore. Now it's just you work and you come home. It's like things that really make you tick and give you that joy again or drive is a challenge to redefine yourself. And it's that no one talked about that when I was in college, and it was this almost like depression state for a little bit of like, what do I do now? Like life is not mapped out for me. It's definitely different. And we've talked to some people. I interviewed a guy, Taj Deshawn, who actually helps kids with that transition period, because it's kind of like that mental health side that when I was in college, people didn't talk about very much. And in the last week's episode, I talked to a girl named Lauren Hess who said, there's a difference between mental toughness and mental health. They don't coincide with each other. You can be mentally tough to go out there, perform in front of 80,000 people, but you're not your mental health is lacking so much that getting up and going to the cafeteria is just a struggle to leave your room because you just don't want to face the world. And, I feel like, it hits you as an athlete, and then it hits you a little bit different as what you're supposed to be, an adult at that point, right? You're 22. And it's like, okay, what's the next step? Do I get a job? I'm young enough to continue to compete. My body is still, able to do these things. And it's that in between. So, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of programs that are popping up now because it's athletes like us that we went through that. It's like, all right, we have to make sure that the next generation does not go through that. Right? Yeah.
So it is tough, and it's certainly
very tough. And you're young, and you're not really thinking 5-10 years down the road. You're just thinking here and now. And back then your goals were so like, okay, next week we play Michigan, next week we play Minnesota, and we got the big NCAA tournament. You just have every week a new goal and another chapter to look forward to, and that's not what adulthood is like. And it's such a huge shift in your mind. And yeah, I think tapping into that side, I mean, it's great that mental health stuff is talked about so much more now. Yeah.
So now we are at our 5-question segment, and it's going to be a couple different questions for you. So first question is, do you remember when you realized that you could play volleyball at the Division I level, and what was that feeling?
Yes. I don't remember specifically like Division I, but I remember finding out like, I was like really talented and was going to have a bright future in this. And there was this, I think it still exists, I don't even know, but it was called prepvolleyball.com, and it was kind of like the only content creator for volleyball. And they would rank, teams, and they'd rank players. And I, freshman year of high school, got announced as the top 7 freshman players of the year in the country. And that was just shocking. My mom read it to me, and I remember like going to take a shower and like crying and being like, this is it. Like, this is your life's mission. You're going to be a really good volleyball player. And that was a very like eye-opening moment for me, that this was my journey and I was going to make the most of it.
Yeah. What was it like getting into your first game as a Penn State volleyball player?
Terrifying. Absolutely terrifying. I remember putting the jersey on the first time in the locker room, thinking that was so cool. We were at Hawaii playing UCLA, and, you know, with volleyball, the way it works, like you have the rotations, right? So when the certain player was rotating back, we had a timeout, and coach told me, when Nick gets back row, you're going to go in and serve for her, which was a mistake. He should have never told me that, because then I had like 5 to 10 minutes to sit on the bench and just think about it and freak out. And so then I went in and served, and I missed it long. And he always told us it was better to go long than in the net, because that meant you were like tentative, and it's better to just hit it as hard as you could. So I hit it long. I get subbed out. Also, it was set point, which in volleyball, when it's the last point, people slow clap. So Hawaii has a huge attendance like for their game. So it's probably like 10,000 people slow clapping when I go in and serve. I don't even think I felt my body, and I missed it really long, and I get subbed out, and he calls me over to the bench, and he goes, I had $20 you were going to hit the ref. And I go, so I exceeded your expectations. And then I go down to the bench and I see my best friend, and she just gives me like a massive fist pump, and I was like mortified. But then I had like 2 other teammates who that was their first. They went in for the first time too. And all made fools of ourselves. And one teammate came out and she was like, Coach, I couldn't even feel my body. Like my whole body was down. So I was like, all right, I'm not alone. This is just what happens when you go in one of these matches. Like, you're just terrified.
Yeah. Next question is, when you guys won the national title, any of the times, or at least what was the most memorable of winning any of your national titles?
Yeah, it would definitely, I know exactly like which one was the most meaningful. It was 2009 in Tampa, Florida. And we played Nebraska in the semifinal. Or actually, sorry, that was freshman year. We played Nebraska in Omaha in the semifinals. And Nebraska fans are crazy. They love volleyball. So we beat them in the semifinals in a 5-setter.
Yeah, didn't they just make an attendance record?
Yeah, I mean, they
just had an attendance record.
Yeah, Nebraska is best volleyball fan base ever. So yeah, that was a semifinal. But the best national championship was 2009 in Tampa, and still to this day is like one of the like most talked about national championships. So we were down. You have to win 3 of 5 sets to win a match, and we were down 2 sets. And it's kind of like the halftime of volleyball. You go into the locker room. And we go into the locker room, and one of our freshmen just kind of like had a freak out and like was yelling at the upperclassmen, like, this is not how we're going out this season. And we had a really amazing senior class, who was just determined to not go out losing. And, it was just such a like motivating speech. And then at halftime by her that we went out and won the next 3 sets and beat Texas in, just the after party at this bar in Tampa of just like, wow, we did it. And at that time, that was 3 in a row, which was NCAA volleyball history. So it was just probably the sweetest one of all of them.
Yeah. And before we get to the final question, I have one more for you before we get to the advice question. And it's, when you discovered that volleyball was your thing, and you just talked about it, after drying the tears, who did you call, and who was kind of the person that you confided in the most throughout your career?
Yeah, it would definitely be my best friend, Katie. Just walking such a similar journey together of being so young and having to make these decisions and not really having anybody. Like, I'm so lucky I had her by my side to bounce ideas off of and, make this decision together. And then even in college, like preseason, it's just so hard. Like, she was the go-to all the time to call and talk through the hard times, the challenging times, but also the celebrations. Like, she went on to win the national championship my senior year, and I surprised her in San Antonio and was there to celebrate with her. So the ups and downs, but yeah, being so young and going through that recruiting, she was definitely the first person, and we, made a decision to really commit to this and go all the way to college and do it together. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So final question, same one everyone gets every week, is what's a piece of advice that you either got from, your tough old school coach, or, your basketball playing dad, or somebody throughout your entire journey of being a high level athlete that you remember to this day and passed it on to those 14 to 17-year-olds that you used to coach?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because I feel like I learned so much in my 4 years there at Penn State. I think there's this one quote that my college coach was quoted saying at a press conference one time that has always really stuck with me. And I don't know if I'll get it right to the word, exact words, but he always said it was something about the most successful people in life are really good at canceling out all the noise and really focusing in on their goals. And I think that life is going to present so many things, whether it's socially in college with all your friends, and there's always things pulling you, but getting really focused in on what makes you tick or what makes you happy, and defining that for yourself. A lot of people define success in college as being the all-star player and starting all 4 years. And that wasn't my journey, but what makes you happiest and focusing in on that. And there's going to be distractions and ups and downs. Don't ride the highs too high, don't ride the lows too low, and just kind of steady the course. Was really the kind of what coach instilled in all of us. And I think that is something I've carried with me throughout life, and just trying to cancel out a lot of that noise that will allow you to be successful.
Yeah. That's awesome. Katie, this has been great. We're at the end.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it was awesome to catch up. It was great to hear about your journey. And I said the same thing. I interviewed Millery, like I said, a couple of weeks ago, and all of us are always in the office together, and
yeah,
we're always working and everything else, but we never actually kind of talk about the different journeys and stuff that we had, right? Yeah. So it's always good to catch up with people that you had a chance to work with for so long and actually find out after so many years what they went through and what their journey was.
I know, and it's funny that stuff I really haven't thought about in a long time as time goes on. Sometimes it's that feels like a former life. So it's fun to stop and pause and talk about it. And I'm really thankful you guys asked me to be on it.
Yeah, and we're happy that we were able to get some time on your calendar. As I said, we've all grown up to be these really busy adults, or at least we like to tell ourselves that.
Trying. I refuse to grow up, but society makes me have a job and do all these things.
But all right, Katie, I'm going to let you go. I'm going to let you enjoy the rest of your night. I really, really appreciate it. So thank you very much for being on.
Of course. Good to see you.
Thank you for listening to the Athletes to Athletes podcast. To make sure you don't miss when a new episode comes your way, head to the Athletes to Athletes YouTube page to like and subscribe, or to Spotify, Apple Music, or wherever you get your podcast. Again, we appreciate you listening, and we'll see you again next time.